Welcome back to the Poor Proles Almanac. Today we're joined by Chris Patton, the founder of the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative. The Midwest Elderberry Cooperative has 31 paid members and has a managed network of over 160 elderberry growers throughout the United States. With a background in marketing, engineering, and public relations, Chris has worked to make the American elderberry as popular as the European elderberry and more. We talk about cooperative structures, how a cooperative actually works, when it's the best solution for farmers, and how it can be a place of radical organizing. I'm really excited to see what happens with this organization and how they can show what a new food system could look like. So take a listen and let us know what you think. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of your organization, the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative?
Okay, well, back in 2011, I attended what was then called the Moses Conference, the end of February. And it's one of the largest organic agricultural conferences held in La Crosse, Wisconsin, every year by the Midwest Sustainable Agriculture Society organization. They've changed their name to Marble Seed now, if you want to search for it. But they have a big conference every year, and they bring speakers from New England, from the West Coast, although mostly from the Midwest. And at the time, I was looking to buy some land and grow my own food because I didn't trust the stock market and I didn't have a lot of savings anyway. I could buy a used truck with what I had saved. And I figured, okay, I'm going to need to try to do some things. And my oldest son was interested in that way. And so that's what I was looking to do. And I'd taken some classes and then that was a little inefficient. So I started going to these conferences. And at the conference, I heard Terry Durham, who is a long-time organic farmer from central Missouri, talking about American elderberry. And he made the big case for that. You know, it's been used going back to Hippocrates, who wrote a whole book on it. And it's been a continuous commercial crop, very valuable in Europe since about that time. But it wasn't here in this country. It was basically used by some hobby farmers and herbalists and things like that, but it wasn't a commercial crop. And there's a lot of potential value to it because not only does it have a lot of health benefits, it's also very good for the environment, and there's good economic opportunities as well. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that even today in Europe, elderberry is hand harvested. Now they process it with machinery. They have established infrastructure we don't here. And that's probably the primary reason why I started the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative a year later, is I decided I wanted to get into this. At first, I looked at it, and I was living in Minnesota at the time, and I said, okay, Terry, if I'm looking at 60 acres, and I can put 20 acres into elderberry. I said, if I do that, how am I going to get my berries to you to sell them? Because they don't last long once they've been picked. We tend to freeze them right away to keep them. And he hesitated just momentarily. He said, yes, he would. And I said, that was too long. And so I went back to my tent and I wrote a one-page contract on my lap pad. And I said, let me try distributing the products you're already making in Minnesota, because there's a lot of food co-ops in Minnesota. And that's kind of how I got started. And a year later, I was there working the same conference with him at his booth. And I met Paul Otten, who was a longtime farmer, lived north of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. You know, he's 10, 12 years older than I am, but he'd been like an organic farmer for 40 years and specialist in berries. And he was interested in adding some elderberry. And we ended up farming together. He wasn't planning on it, but I had a lot of cuttings. And he said, we'll find some room. And so we ended up growing elderberry together on about 1.5 acres of the 40 acres or so that he farmed, because he had a CSA and he had a lot of other berries. You know, he had raspberries, strawberries, gooseberries, currants of all different kinds. You know, he's a past president of the American Bramble Association. Very, very knowledgeable and experienced. And his basic belief was healthy soil makes for healthy people. And so philosophically, we were very close. And I learned a lot from him. And because he had that experience, I felt we could go ahead and establish a cooperative, you know, relying on his experience to be sort of like the farmer mentor. And, you know, I have more of an organizational background in administration and I'm almost an accountant. Yeah.
It's a dangerous word, almost an
Almost,
accountant.
yes. I make it easy for accountants, let's put it this way. And we needed that in order to get some grants available from a farmer he knew that worked in that area to see if this was feasible for other people and to try it out. And that's kind of how we got started. And we did some feasibility studies, and we worked with farmers there in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we got it up and running. The co-op was running, and we got a grant to actually do some real cooperative legal work rather than what I was able to pull out of some templates to get things started. And so we have a pretty good organization. We were growing berries and having educational seminars, and we had a lot of success with people who wanted to grow on their own and make their own products and sell them or sell directly to the public. And to this day, I would say that's still the most profitable and successful aspect of elderberry. And a lot of what I do now is actually supply frozen berries, frozen juice, dried berries, freeze-dried berries, and things to hundreds of small businesses across the country, from several dozen producing growers, although I work with over 100 farmers from coast to coast.
Interesting.
So that's kind of how it's been. And over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, I've shifted towards trying to get the infrastructure in place for more commercial production on a larger scale, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to hire someone to replace me.
And that's the goal.
Yes.
I'm curious, you said you formalized the cooperative. So not to get into too granular detail, but I'm really curious. So did you set up as a C Corp subchapter T, which is the cooperative corporation?
Well, okay. So Minnesota, these cooperative structures are very state oriented.
Yeah.
And so Minnesota is a very friendly state for cooperatives. So even though I live in South Dakota now, and there's another story of that'd be too far off track. Family is part of it, but I'm still working primarily in Minnesota, and because the state's been very supportive, and we've also had good support with some USDA and NRCS grants, but they have what's there is called a 308B cooperative and corporate structure. And this allows for us to have shares. I'm blank on the specific term, but basically non-voting shares for investors, so that growers can retain control of the cooperative. So from the beginning, the whole idea and why we want a cooperative is we want the growers to retain control of the vertical integration as much as possible, the means of production. And we needed also to band together in order to get the research and organization, because this is something that basically come up from farmers, people that don't have money. Although most of the government's agricultural program goes to big corporations, if you can find it, there is some money out there for the small guy, and that can be very useful and very helpful to get the pump primed. And that's been basically my approach, in working with the government on this. I said, you help us get started. We won't need to be here every year asking for a handout, because we do believe very strongly that there is value in this crop.
So you guys are a formalized cooperative in the sense that each of the growers has some stake in the greater project. It's not like I know some people use co-ops as like this kind of umbrella term for, we're going to share this one processing resource or marketing resource, but that by definition, that's not really a cooperative, even though you are cooperating. So you are formally like more of that cooperative.
We are co-op, but we're an open co-op.
Yep.
And so this means, it's unlike some of the dairy co-ops and grain co-ops where you have to sell everything to the cooperative and the prices are fixed. And, it's kind of like growing chickens for, Hormel or Jennie-O or somebody. And no, it's not like that. And so our members do vote for a board. We have an elected board, and members all get one vote. They own a share, $500 for an equity share. And then we have a second class of what we call distribution rights shares. And this is where, once we have a commercial capacity in place so that I have enough volume of buyers that I can go and make commitments to growers to buy their crop in advance, then I have, through the distribution rights shares, a way to do that. So they would pay by one share for every pound that they agree that they must sell to the co-op, and the co-op agrees we must buy. And the pricing on that would be determined by all the growers that own distribution rights shares. And then they would participate in the profits and losses of the wholesale ingredients that we made and sold with those particular shares. And then we would still retain the capacity and opportunity to buy from outside growers and outside members if we needed to, and to sell likewise. But co-op members have priority in everything. So, like, I've got some members in New Jersey and New York and Florida and places, California, and they run short of berries almost every year. And so I'm shipping them berries first. And so if we have a bad year, they get it before the rest of the businesses or whatever.
Yeah. You've been doing this for a few years. Do you have any thoughts of maybe I should have done this differently, that differently, in terms of the structure or voting rights or any of those types of things? Has it felt solid? Or
we've had a good experience. Now, the thing that we haven't been able to do is because we've been really scrambling. It's kind of like to have the right culture for that, for it to continue, that takes work. Mm-hmm. And so one of the projects that I've got lined up for this year is to begin a program and to get some help in order to teach co-op leadership and to, expand the concepts and understandings of what is a cooperative and how it works and everything with the growers. Because here again, I'm in my mid-70s. Thankfully, I seem to be able to do pretty good health-wise. But, mortality is the reality.
You're still holding up. Yeah.
and from when I started this at 62, my goal from the beginning was to replace myself with at least 3 or 4 other people. I think it takes 6. And for that, we have to make it a commercial success. And we are at the point of transitioning to that. Now, our legal structure, our attorney was actually one of the leading co-op attorneys in the country. And, Ocean Spray was one of his clients. And he said, "Oh, well, you want to be the Ocean Spray of elderberry?" And I said, "Well, that puts it pretty well."
Yeah, they're not too far from me, so I'm very familiar with Ocean Spray.
Yeah, I figured you'd relate to that. So we've got a real legal structure. I'm not worried about that. It's the people side of things. I seem to have a disposition as a person to be cooperative, but not everybody's that way. We have generally had in the elderberry world rather good relationships between the different farmers and a lot of sharing and openness. This isn't always found in agriculture. And part of that is because Terry Durham, who started all of this, and Terry's recruited far more growers than I have, but we have, I guess, sort of impressed on people this. And we've also told people this is a new thing. We'll do what we can to help you, but don't go starting out too big. Make sure that, you want to do this. Start small. Get the use of the plan. I did a presentation years ago. I titled "The Zen of Elderberry." You've got to sort of emotionally get into this because it's a different kind of farming. Mm-hmm. And I do a lot of work with agroforestry councils. We have online meetings with people all over the country and things. And one of the things I can say is that we are a little bit ahead of the rest of the agroforestry folks in far as marketing. Now, we are behind wild blueberries. They've been established for quite a while, and they're a good example of what we want to do for elderberry. Mm-hmm. We're getting there. I think pretty soon we'll have the means to increase the volume of production. We are actively involved in national trade shows. I've had people I've talked to for 4 and 5 years. And now we're at the point where we can actually maybe start sending them samples and then providing a certain flow of wholesale ingredients, and then at the same time then encourage farmers to establish their fields, because it takes 2 to 4 years to establish an elderberry orchard.
Which comparatively for agroforestry is really quick.
Right. So you'll find I've got people, for instance, that were attracted to like chestnuts, mm-hmm. but they've got elderberry too for that very reason, because you can start getting a return.
Yeah, and I got to imagine out there must be some influence from like Shepard and some of the work he's been doing,
Of course. Yeah, I've met him.
Yeah, who's got some really interesting ideas about how to scale some of these crops.
Mhm.
And I think, being that close to his work, I think would be inspiring enough to get people to want to jump in on something like elderberry.
So one of the things that we've been addressing, we basically, in trying to take elderberry to a commercial scale, there's two challenges. One, it's very established in this country. I mean, it's a larger than $100 million business in American products. You'll find elderberries ingredients, but the thing is they're all imported just about.
Hmm.
Okay, American elderberry can be found in some smaller products, regionally produced, by farmers, or sometimes maybe a couple of farmers working together. But if you're buying elderberry, generally in a product or in a supplement, that's an imported ingredient. So it's an established market, and what we have to do is let people know that American elderberry exists, and we have to have the ability to provide the ingredient formats that they need for their existing processes. And then the advantage we have is that American elderberry is different than the European. It doesn't have the glycosides or protocyanides that we have to worry about, and so you can eat it raw, and it has better taste, I think, for that same reason. And so we have a taste benefit. The thing about that is because the European elderberry doesn't taste that good, they don't make a lot of products where taste is a factor, and that's an opportunity. And I sell to a lot of kombucha people and brewers and things like that, and wineries, and the taste there really does come through. The color is good and strong, and all of the American elderberry is a little more stable in its coloring, and we have a greater variety of the antioxidants or flavanols than is found in the European. The European mainly has four primary nutrients that are desired. We have those four plus three additional, and some indications of additional anti-cancer properties not found in the European. So we do have some things there. The problem is it takes a lot of money to establish that in the marketplace with the research, and because elderberry is a wild plant, and we don't have people out there with patents on particular breeds or anything like that, the financial background to fund those kind of research papers just doesn't exist unless we can get something from the government, and there we're competing with a big farmer and everybody else.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think with American elderberry, it's a totally different styling for a plant compared to the European.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that gives you you can't just say, well, this works overseas, let's bring that here to our elderberries, because those are trees. These are like bushes, sort of.
Yeah, it's the same thing as filberts and American hazelnuts.
Yeah, except the dead canes. Yeah.
And so primarily from the standpoint of horticultural or field management, we look, okay, so elderberry, let me back up a bit, because elderberry is what they call an oligospecies. It varies greatly. And so it's called Sambucus nigra canadensis, and it naturally goes from the Rockies to the Atlantic, down into the Gulf in Florida, and up into Maine and Canada. But it's different plant wherever you go, practically. I mean, we have commercially produced a number of identified cultivars out of the Midwest that are grown successfully in California and New York and Florida and Alabama and places, Tennessee. But, your native species are there, and there's a lot really that we have yet to discover about that. I've talked to some growers that really have some plants that produce fabulously along the Great Lakes that are different than what we have. I've talked to growers in New Jersey years ago. He said, well, how can you sell elderberry flowers? They don't have any aroma. Well, in the Midwest, they do. In the Northeast, apparently they don't. At least most of them don't, I guess. I can't speak for all of them. I wasn't really doing elderberry when I was living in the Northeast, and I didn't have any on our property. So, I just didn't run across it. But that's just the way it is. And then so you've got the market aspect of it and those challenges there. Then there's the technical challenges because it's so labor intensive. And so, on that end, we got a grant, and it's not for the total thing, but it has made a difference so that we could work on an idea that some farmers had to improve the destemming, that is, separating the berries from the cyme. And we are hopeful that that will work out and actually be a continuous flow destemming machine that'll produce anywhere from 1 to 2,000 pounds an hour of destemming, which will, greatly reduce the labor costs and help us to be competitive with the European imports and still deliver profits to the farmer and not be forcing the soil.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You do see elderberry products once in a while, but they don't usually specify. So I'm assuming that they're probably always European.
Yeah, if mostly you'll see concentrates and extracts, and there's nobody doing that with American elderberry yet. We are at the point right now where we're getting to do some sampling done, and we've been focused a little bit more on getting some powders launched. I do have an NRCS grant for some whole berry juice and pumice powders. It's large enough so that we can, produce 1,000 pounds, which will give us some decent sampling in order to develop commercial relationships and work with a couple of co-packers so that we can, begin to supply what would be for us a large buyer, but, in the whole market, not so.
Yeah. Baby steps, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, because you pull out of the market or you fail to supply and you're gone. So, I had people 3-4 years ago wanted 100,000 pounds, 80,000, 50,000 pounds. I didn't have it. And so they go off and they do something else. I go to a trade show in, Expo West, one of the largest natural foods trade shows in the country. And I had some elderberry juice and I poured like in a ginger ale or something else. Oh, this is a great idea. And, but I didn't have it to sell to them. And, a year, 2 years later, they've got a flavor with elderberry in it using the European imported concentrate.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's been happening so far.
Yeah. But I think there's real opportunity because people do value local foods. And I think the narrative is changing. And I'm actually really interested in the farmers that you're working with. If you feel like the type of people that get into elderberry farming reflect the general population of farmers that you otherwise see at trade shows and things like that, just because it is such a unique crop that you have to have a very specific reason why you'd want to get into it.
I would say anybody growing elderberry is very environmentally conscious. I would say probably over half of them are motivated because they have a personal health story, which is to move them towards that kind of a crop. They have to be a bit of a pioneer and, out of the average mold, willing to do that. And many of them are entering in retirement. They want something, but that's not quite as demanding as, growing tomatoes or cucumbers. And elderberry offers that. It depends. I think right now it's most successful for someone who wants to have an independent farm stand, farm operation. And, you can have anywhere from 2 to 40 acres and you've got different things going on in your farm. You may have a CSA, you maybe have a roadside stand. And if you can make your own elderberry syrup or jams or wine or whatever, you can do pretty well.
Yeah, I hope so. I would definitely like to see more.
Oh, that's doing it. I mean, I have seen that in 10 years. I mean, I have people that do it and they're still in business and, and they call me for berries when their own crop runs short.
Awesome. I'm really curious, given the dynamics that we've talked about around the elderberry and then the cooperative structure, which I think is an unconventional model for businesses.
Yeah. And I want to interrupt you here.
Yeah.
One point. One of the things, I'm very, very strong on local foods. I mean, I grow a lot of my own food. And there are benefits to our smaller growers that aren't going to be selling everything through the co-op. Because if we can, by being together and working on these scaling up, if we can have better technology for them, if we can get some, better research that maybe otherwise wouldn't come around to support what they're doing in their crops, we share that with them and they get a chance to use that. And I think all of us together help to build market and market awareness. And that's one thing. Elderberry has a better market awareness than, say, aronia berry or chokeberry or black currants, which are very popular in Europe.
Yeah. To your point, like one of the things that a friend of mine is a book agent, and we were talking about something, and she was like, it's not a bad thing if somebody else writes a book and it's popular and it's kind of like yours. It means
Yes.
there's an audience for it. And
Yes.
that's kind of how I feel about the European elderberry. It's not a bad thing that people are wanting these products. It means
No.
that they want what you also have, right?
Right. And look, don't mistake me in any way. I mean, European elderberry is good for you if it's processed right. It is very valuable, and there's a ton of research on that compared to the American elderberry. I have a lot of that on our website, midwest-elderberry.coop. And that has really opened the door for us to be able to do what we can do a lot easier than would be possible otherwise. It's just like we don't have to develop a market. We have to get a bit of that market share.
Yeah, and you've got the added benefit of saying, "Hey, we're local, we're native, we're supporting native pollinators, we're doing all these things that the European elderberry isn't."
Not for us anyway. I mean, it
Yeah.
does it for Europe. I mean, yes.
Over there it is, but not here.
Yeah, elderberries. The University of Missouri hired some grad students, and they counted over 60 native pollinators on elderberry there in Missouri. So it has, it's got nectaries, not just the flowers. And it's really good for the soil health and in building up the soil. A lot of benefits to the environment as well as to people.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, and I'm still really curious about this. Given, again, the structure of a cooperative, the uniqueness of the crop that you're selling, this kind of like bold vision of how to apply this native fruit, I'm really curious about, and you may not want to answer this, so I will give you the out now. Have you seen like a really interesting mix of like politics? Because I feel like the cooperative structure inherently will pull people from both ends for different reasons, different and similar reasons, actually, because it's both liberating and focused on like collective good.
I would say absolutely that is the case. It's kind of like, I don't think I fit in any straight political profile for that reason either. And, the thing is, if you have a good cooperative, and I think we have a good one that wants to be better, and we're going to work at being better, you're going to balance individual responsibility, reward, and initiative with the benefits of cooperation. And I really am looking to try to achieve that. And I think so far in our early stages here in getting going, we've been that way. We don't have people that have sustained a lot of losses. We've managed expectations. We are finally making progress. It's taken a little longer than I would have liked, but I can see now, we're looking with the current situation, we're looking at least developing commission-based sales positions to start to help. And I'm not really advertising or doing much on the website. I've got a new design. I haven't been able to finish editing the words on it. And, we haven't been pushing that, but we're growing. Okay. And so far, we haven't outgrown, the market has not outgrown our capacity to supply it. And I think we're in danger of doing that if we don't get some more growers going. But it's kind of hard because it's a different type of person than makes up most of our membership right now, because most of our membership are growing and selling their own products. And I'm not looking to them generally for supplying for a commercial market. So it's a whole different, it's kind of like you got two hands, right?
Yeah.
But together, I think it'll help make the cooperative stronger. But in agriculture, my background is in archaeology. I was a professional archaeologist during my 20s. And so I've done a lot of work in the history of civilization and different cultures and cultural development and stability and the role of food and agriculture, disease and everything in the rise and fall of civilizations. So I see the importance of this, and in sort of modern terms more, we look at it as revitalizing rural America, playing a little role. And I kind of look at it, okay, well, the world is kind of messed up place, but we're trying to make our little part of it work right.
Yeah. We use the term local foods, but I think a better term would be place-based foods.
I like that.
Because, like, it's great that I don't know, oranges were grown in a greenhouse down the street, but it has no context within, like, this greater narrative. And that doesn't mean you can't eat oranges, but, like, we should be thinking about the way our food relates to the world around us intimately in a way we don't really, for the first time in human history, speaking of, like, this longer narrative, that we don't do that. And is it also coincidental that we have all these other issues when we're so disconnected from the place where we exist? I don't know if there's a direct answer, but it is.
No, I really like where you're going with that, because basically, if you look at human civilization, it is an artificial reality created by human beings that requires outside sources of energy to sustain it. And it works as long as you don't get too disconnected from the natural order. And really, in my opinion, we are too disconnected from the natural order at this point. And this is why we need to change commercial agriculture and get it back towards the organic, regenerative, renewal. And how to do that on scale is a huge challenge beyond what I can do. I just hope that, I do work with people that want to diversify. They're several generation dairy people. They've only had cows. Well, now they're looking at growing some elderberry. That's the kind of thing I'm doing. And it's a little catalyst to try to let people know that, hey, there are other ways of doing it, of farming, and you can make some money at it too. And hey, guess what? It's good for your land and good for the environment, the critters, and everything else. When I grew up, kids wandered. We ate dirt. We just it was different. Well, of course, I grew up in the country too, so it was a little easier to do that. But when I was became a teen, I had to go live in the city because my folks got divorced, and it was total disconnect. And civilization was just very different. And I had a McDonald's a block away from my house. Hamburgers were only a quarter still, but I mean, it was it's just totally different reality. But
Yeah.
People get divorced and separated from the natural order of things, and I think it distorts human relations as well as the economies.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. A lot of our economic structure is completely contingent on things happening thousands of miles away that it's totally disorientating to even try to wrap your head around. And
Oh yeah.
to fully comprehend the consequences of every decision you make to buy this, that, and the other thing, that if you really spent the time to think about it and fully understood, you'd probably just be paralyzed with fear, because every decision comes with so much weight because of that infrastructure that exists to make the world we live in continue to go round, right?
Absolutely. To me, it's I've always been more on the idealistic bent of things, but it basically in the real world, every decision is not totally black or white. To me, the key is you want to choose the answer that has more life in it than not.
Mm.
And that to me is the basis of goodness, and trying to look at the consequences down the line and not just today. And I farm that way. I haven't used pesticides around my house any time in my life, really. And I don't kill bugs unless I know for sure it's there eating, just destroying my plant. Life to me, to a certain extent, all life is sacred, even though we have to take life in order to live. I mean, plants die for me to eat them too. It's not just animals. And it's here again, one of the things as an archaeologist, anthropologist background, one of the things that I sometimes would like to remind people is that at some point, all of us were an indigenous people. You go back far enough, and you've got cavemen in your ancestry, right? So it's just a question. Different times at different places, we've come out and become more or less civilized. But those roots and those traditions and things that we can see in peoples that were indigenous when, say, our civilization ran into them, can be lessons and examples to us and how to connect.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think we, as people here in North America, who arrived at some point in the last 500 years. We do have a responsibility to the landscape to honor how it was managed. And we also have a responsibility to ourselves to take a deeper look at our ancestry and understand, my parents are from Italy, and thinking about, okay, why were these foods the foods you ate, right? There's a reason, like to go back to my example of the place-based foods. The reason why Italians have the Feast of Seven Fishes is because they live next to the ocean. There's a very rational and simple answer to some of these things.
That's
like
right.
why are these certain foods like a cultural part of your diet, part of your cultural identity, right? Culture really comes down to food, because food is the product of the landscape around you. So wherever you come from, it's a reflection of what that is. And I think to get back to this point of like being disconnected from the world around us, if you have no context for who you are, from where you've come from, and what the landscape has always done and what kind of fruits it has borne to humans on that landscape, how can you ever move forward without understanding those things?
Well, I agree with you, and that's why I grow my food. And I grow a little differently here than I did in Florida when I lived there, or in New Hampshire when I lived there, because I'm in a different area, and and I buy from my local farmers for things that I don't grow here, because there's only so much I can put on my lot. The city already gets on my case every now and then, and I'm
As
sure
it
I'm not the
does.
only one who understands that.
Yeah.
But that is key. It's a respect. It's the kind of thing where you got to work with nature and not just totally fight it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's accommodation and understanding the longer term and how that works. It's just like, if you're starting to grow organic, just the basic understanding. Well, you're going to get pests first before you get the insects that come and eat the pests, because they're going to come to where the food is, and until the food's there, they're not going to be there. And when I moved, I had to start all over again, and I went through that whole thing all over. But now, I'm starting to see a more balanced insect population, and I don't have the issues I used to have, and I've got more of the hunter pests, the praying mantises and spiders, and all the other little critters that go out there and eat other little critters. And there's more balance, but it took a few years for that to revive itself on this particular land that before had just been grass.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes time. Nature can do a lot, but you have to give her time.
Yep.
To bring this back to American elderberry, which I think is a very interesting crop for all of the reasons we've been talking about, what place-based food, what local food, what honoring the landscape looks like, right?
Right.
Do you see, not do you see, I guess, where do you see the American elderberry industry 10 or 20 years from now? Do you see it at scale of the European elderberry, or you think it's going to be a long fight?
No, I think we'll get there. God willing, we'll get there. I'm very, I have to say the progress made the last couple of years, and I've got some allied organizations to thank that really have made it possible in the Midwest that your audience wouldn't be aware of. But we've also gotten some private funding from like the Walton Family Foundation, which they probably would be aware of, that is making a big difference. And that's not directly through the co-op necessarily. We work with an organization called Renewing the Countryside, and Savannah Institute, and the University of Minnesota Forever Green Initiative, Food Investment Fund, and University of Wisconsin, and then agroforestry down in the University of Missouri. And so, I work with a lot of these other organizations. I mean, I've been on calls with UC Berkeley and Davis and different languages, because they've got a Western elderberry. And then we did some work. Oh, well, okay, that's kind of a bit harder. It's big tree. Do we do the Midwest underneath? Does it work? So there are areas where there's a lot of investigation going on. I still think there's a huge amount that we don't know about all the local variants of or cultivars of elderberry in different parts of the country. We have had, I did some work also at the University of Vermont. They've quoted me and Terry, and they put out a pretty nice an extensive 98-page document on growing elderberry. I've got it on our website, and I'm sure you can get it at the University of Vermont Extension. Do it.
I think I downloaded it from you. It's a pretty good read.
Yeah, and it's a little out of date. We've learned some things since then, but it's a great place to start for your area. Everything is different by area, and this is particularly true of elderberry, and that's kind of why, even at my house, I've got 13 different kinds, just so that I can stay familiar with some of the more popular cultivars used by our growers, and then I've got some wild ones I'm experimenting with.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm hopeful that the American elderberry shows up in my grocery store. But until then, where can people find your products or buy American elderberry stuff?
Well, okay, so you've got to look in your local area. There are, I know in Connecticut, there's a fairly large regional producer, and they'll be in like the health food stores. I think Wegmans even has some. We do sell ingredients primarily to businesses. They're wholesale ingredients online at midwest-elderberry.coop, but there's a lot of information there. I do have two subdomains, one directed to growers and one on health benefits that you can link off of those pages if you go to the health or the grow tabs. I don't have everything there. I stopped doing web design about 12 years ago. And and I haven't, I'm just in the process now trying to tool that up to look a little more modern, but it is accessible.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information there. I do plan to have a directory. Once first I've got a nice design. Once I do go through and edit, because it's too wordy, I got to cut the number of words down, and I get that up and running. Then the next step is I'm going to have a regional directory so that you can look up and find the farms closest to you selling American elderberry, and a little introduction to them, what they do and then a link over to their own websites. So I want to have that available to make it easy for people across this country to find the closest elderberry farmers and to support them locally. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, look for and ask for American elderberry. And you might not get it right away, but we want the people that pay us and ask and say, oh, yeah, I've had people asking for that. Yes, we want some.
Yeah. Do you guys have social media, Facebook or Instagram?
Some of the farmers do.
Okay, but none for the cooperative itself?
I was on Facebook, but I got shut down so many times during COVID by posting academic articles with peer-reviewed references that they didn't want published because it said elderberry would help against that and other viruses.
but nothing for the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative itself? No?
Well, that was a Midwest Elderberry Cooperative.
Oh, gotcha.
That they shut down. And
Gotcha.
And frankly, I really need those 6 people working for me now. If you're going to do social media right, you've got to have somebody to stay on top of it, and I cannot do that.
I hear you. It's a lot.
I can't do it properly, so I'm not doing it. I do have plans, and we've got a grant for developing marketing, and we're reworking our business plan for scaling up. And that's definitely an area we want to pay attention to, and to hire someone, find a grant maybe to help them get started and to focus on that and to build that specifically and to manage it. Now, River Hills Harvest and some of the other growers, Elder Farms, and I don't know, I forget the name of his name, Bill's operation in Connecticut, they do social media. And so if you look, if you've got an active farm, they'll do that. There's another guy in Ohio that's got his stuff in stores and things, and he's been very successful in selling his own products. So you'll be finding their own products.
Gotcha.
And they'll be based on, some of them might be dried berries, jams, jellies, syrups, juices. Some are now starting to do some waters, flavored waters.
Mm-hmm.
Vitamin waters with elderberry and things like that. They're
interesting.
It's growing, and it's going to continue to grow. You just have to look for it.
Awesome. Before we go, I do have a completely out of left field question for you.
Okay.
So you've been out in that area. You were in Minnesota for a while. You've been out there for a while, right?
Yes.
Were you around or familiar with the sunchoke folks back in the 80s? American Energy farming systems?
No, but I grow sunchokes.
Oh man, you've got to read this book. Oh, what's it called? There was these 2 farmers that started a sunchoke farm to produce ethanol, and they got a ton of people to buy in. It's the craziest story.
Oh,
As a sunchoke farmer and a Midwesterner, you're gonna love it.
oh, that's something else. No, I actually grow them.
Yeah, I do too. They're great. They're easy to grow.
That's one of the few things I've got left to dig up.
The Great Jerusalem Artichoke Circus.
The Great what?
Jerusalem Artichoke.
Oh, Jerusalem Artichoke Circus. Okay.
Yeah. You're going to love it. As a farmer, as somebody who runs a cooperative, as somebody who lives in the same area, the story is just unreal. It seems fake. Every single bit of it. It'll be an experience. You'll love it.
Well, I hope so, because I've heard a lot of sad stories from aronia growers. So that have lost a lot of money. Yeah.
From like scams or just like
scam co-ops and scam this and that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm curious about that then. I want to know.
And it's kind of like growing emus some years ago, and people come in, they promoted aronia or chokeberry, and they sold a lot of equipment and sold people the stuff to grow it, but didn't really explain to them that it's mass produced in Europe, and they're all set up, and it's very competitive, and Americans really aren't. There was no market for it here. I mean, it's got some nice research. I mean, it's closer. It's pretty much the same plant in Europe as it is here, as opposed to the elderberry. But I mean, there's no market except for supplements and going through the long educational process of a customer base.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some digging on that, but you can find that book online. I'm sure the library can get it for you too. But it's a wild ride of a story. If you're a sunchoke appreciator and a co-op farmer guy, there's weird investments from TV personalities, like religious cult figures. It's a wild ride of stuff you would never think could ever happen in real life, like TV kind of content. But anyways, that's totally unrelated. I was really hoping you're like, oh, I know Fred.
Oh, I don't. I know sunchokes.
Yeah. Chris, thanks so much. This has been really interesting. I can't wait to see how things grow with you guys. And I'm definitely going to be buying some stuff.
Well, and the thing is, if you look at just a second.
No worries.
My wife. Anyway, you notice a duck call. I raised ducks as a kid, so I started with 3 and ended up with 86. And I really liked having ducks. And when I'd come home from school, they'd all fly to meet me. So it was quite an experience. Anyway,